We begin with breaking news on the Air Canada strike. The federal government is intervening. Jobs Minister Patty Hajdu acting to end the stoppage within hours of it taking effect. Earlier, more than 10,000 flight attendants walked off the job shortly before 1 a.m. Eastern. Talks over a new contract broke down after more than 8 months. Air Canada grounded most of its fleet and issued a lockout notice, but the minister says she is now sending the dispute to binding arbitration.
This is not a decision that I have taken lightly, but the potential for immediate negative impact on Canadians and our economy is simply too great. Labor disruption impedes the movement of passengers and critical cargo. Canadians rely on air travel every day, and its importance cannot be understated. Now is not the time to take risks with our economy. A work stoppage would cause thousands of Canadians to be stranded abroad and across this country, and this is simply unacceptable. These parties have had months at the negotiation table. They've had support through the Federal Mediation Service, and they have been unable to cross the finish line. Arbitration is the most stable way to conclude this process for Canadians while allowing parties to reach a deal.
Many of the striking flight attendants have spent today on picket lines at airports across the country as travelers across Canada and abroad scramble to make new plans. Air Canada operates about 700 flights daily. A complete shutdown would have affected 130,000 travelers per day. Hajdu says it could take several days for Air Canada to reposition its planes and get services back to normal. CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in Ottawa is following this story for us. She has more, starting with reaction from the union.
QP extremely upset about this decision by the federal Minister of Jobs to send their striking workers back on the job, releasing a statement today saying that Air Canada asked the government to, what they said, crush underpaid flight attendants' charter rights, and Employment Minister Patty Hajdu only waited a few hours to deliver. I want to show you a bit more of that statement. They go on to say the Liberal government is rewarding Air Canada's refusal to negotiate fairly by giving them exactly what they wanted. This sets a terrible precedent. Contrary to the minister's remarks, this will not ensure labor peace at Air Canada. The union goes on to say that by forcing binding arbitration, they believe that this will just kick the issues down the road and that this will continue to be an issue between Air Canada and the union. Now, Patty Hajdu today is speaking to reporters here in Ottawa about her decision to invoke Section 107 and essentially unilaterally send these striking workers back on the job. She said that last year, Canadians paid a high price, in her words, with multiple sectors going on strike, that this was unacceptable, that thousands of Canadians were relying on these flights to fly, saying that they were at the negotiating table for months, and asked, what changed, what caused you to want to do this now? She said that yesterday she had met with both sides, that they were no further close to resolving some of the key issues, and really feels that arbitration will be the solution here. Now, I mentioned Section 107. This is a part of the Canada Labour Code that essentially gives the minister the power to intervene in a labour dispute if they believe that it's needed to maintain or secure industrial peace. And it's actually a pretty obscure piece of legislation that a lot of people weren't really that aware of. But recently, in the last year or so, the Liberal government has been using this Section 107 of the Labour Code to send striking workers back on the job at ports, rail yards, and also at Canada Post. This is really the fastest use of 107 I think I've seen, just literally within a few hours of the strike taking effect. And experts that I've spoken to say that they're really concerned that this is poisoning negotiations and making it really hard for striking workers to have any sort of sway with their employer, any sort of teeth to what they're doing. So I asked the Labour Minister, I've actually been asking for a few days for a response to these concerns, and I asked her in that press conference earlier today, if she is anti-union. Have a listen to her response.
We believe that unions are an essential part of a healthy and growing economy. However, in a case like this, where multiple efforts have been made to conclude an agreement that satisfies both parties, and it is clear that they are at an impasse, it is very clear they need some help in arbitrating the final items.
The union for the flight attendants, though, obviously reacting to this, saying that they feel very much that their charter right to strike has been taken away unilaterally by this minister.
In that press conference, Marina, you were pressing the minister on the concern that some groups have expressed about Ottawa's decision to invoke this section that you've been explaining to us, Section 107, to send disputes to binding arbitration. Can you tell us what those groups exactly are worried about?
Yeah, and Section 107 gives the minister the power to kind of take any sort of action. So we've also seen in the case with Canada Post, where the minister, Stephen McKinnon at the time, used it to kind of extend a collective agreement. And that is why Canada Post and CUPW, the union for its workers, are still in a labor dispute because essentially what happened was, you might remember we had that strike at Canada Post right before the holidays. The minister stepped in, used this Section 107, extended the collective agreement into the spring. And then that's why we, again, this spring saw that strike action from Canada Post workers where they were saying we're not going to do extra overtime hours. And we actually are expecting Canada Post and the union to go back to the table just this coming week. So that labor negotiation is still going on. And so labor experts, union leaders say that they have a real issue with this Section 107, in part because it gives the minister this power to act. When in the past, people might remember the common thing to do was to do back-to-work legislation. And unions say while they oppose that too, at least it meant that the minister had to present legislation, it had to go through the House of Commons, it had to be criticized by the opposition parties, whereas this basically allows the minister, some experts have said, with an email to essentially order striking workers back to work. And so there's really a lot of concerns within the labor community that this is violating the charter right to strike. And they argue that it also really sours the bargaining process. Have a listen to Chris Roberts from the Canadian Labour Congress. His group is actually taking the federal government to court over its use of Section 107.
The government relied on Section 107 so frequently last year that we have a real concern that employers are getting the message that they can simply surface bargain, let the issues run to impasse, and at that point, the government will intervene and prevent a strike and resolve the issues. So the employer doesn't have to bargain seriously toward a deal at the bargaining table.
An employment lawyer who represents companies I spoke to, though, says that he felt that the government really does need some way to step in on behalf of the public during these labor disputes, especially as we see kind of all of the turmoil going on with our economy at this point.
CBC's Marina von Stackelberg in Ottawa.